Okay, we are recording. I do declare. Hello and welcome to episode 96 of Question and Answer. I am your host, pannobhasa, and I've already told you that, and you probably didn't even notice because this is my second take. I got to like question 3. Already answered the first 3 questions, or started to answer the third one, and then I realized that my computer wasn't plugged in and the battery was almost dead. And this recording software takes some energy, and when it gets down to like close to 0, then it gets it starts acting weird, and the audio and video start getting out of sync and stuff, which may happen anyway because right now I'm at 23% battery charge. But we'll just see how it goes. The show must go on, even if it sucks. So anyways, I'm a little more hoarse than usual today, I think, because I feel like I've been fighting off some kind of a virus. And it just so happens I told a nurse about this earlier this week. Not over that, over something entirely different. I went to see her over something entirely different. And she said, a lot of people have been saying that, and she thought it was some kind of pollen. But regardless of whether it is a virus or pollen or demonic possession or whatever it is, I'm a little more hoarse than usual, so bear with me. And I'm drinking orange juice just in case it is a virus. Or who knows, maybe some demonic entities don't like orange juice. And the reason why I did see a nurse and then a doctor is because I twisted my knee at work, bending awkwardly, and it got too sore to walk on. I had to take a day off from work, and then because it was a work-related injury that required me to take a day off, I had to see a doctor before I could return to full duty. So there it is. I'm going to be fine though. No like torn meniscus that's torn enough for me to require surgery or any such thing. Knock wood, I should say, I guess. And let's just start answering questions. This first question, I'm not sure if it was like a real question with expecting an answer from me. It could just be rhetorical, but there are two question marks in this question, and it was posted below a Q&A video, so I'm answering it. And it's from Athena's Sigil. And Athena's Sigil says, shadow people. Of all the paranormal activity I've endured, this was both real and experiential for me. I encountered them in the late 80s and early 90s, and the experience was both dreamlike, frightening, and realistic all rolled into one. When I had these encounters, I had no idea that others had too. As time went on, particularly in the social media age, many people have had similar experiences. What does it all mean? Damn if I know, but I'm glad that it's been 30 years since. Anyone else? So, I think the whole topic of shadow beings or shadow figures or shadow people came up because I think it was the previous Q&A. I was mentioning ghost shows and just paranormal shows in general. And my woman, my lady love, very much likes these kind of shows. And so I've been watching some along with her, and usually I watch more than she does, because if a woman is like lying on a bed or couch watching like a movie or something, as a general rule she's asleep within 20 minutes, and then I'm lying there watching the rest of the show. So she likes ghost shows, so I watch more of them than she does, just because that's the way it works out. And on these ghost shows, like the Dead Files, for example, shadow figures are a dime a dozen. It's like everybody sees shadow figures. I mean, that's just a given. They don't even need to mention that they see shadow figures, because everybody sees shadow figures in a haunted house like the ones that Amy Allen and Steve DeChevy go to. And of course, they always, well, not all of them, but most of them get scratched at night, and then of course they got a picture of it, so they hold it up to the camera so you can see a close-up of some scratched skin. Anyways, before I go on a prolonged rant about ghost shows, they see shadow figures, and apparently Athena's Sigil also saw shadow figures. And I'd never really heard of shadow figures before I started watching ghost shows. I assume that, I've read about, a shadowy presence in a haunted house or some such thing. But it wasn't like an entire category of entities called shadow figures or shadow beings. That's a new one on me. And I would assume, not having seen one myself, but I would assume that it would be like going with the Buddhist 31 planes of existence, it would be the ghost realm. That there would be beings, assuming that they're not hallucinations. I assume some of them would be hallucinations, but the ones that aren't hallucinations, I would assume that it would belong to the category of the ghost realm in going with Buddhist cosmology. And that would be beings that are less conscious than us. They might live in kind of a murky dream world. They're not like fully developed mentally as we are. And, they probably have like, even the matter of which they are composed, because in Buddhism, even ghosts or so-called spirits do have physical bodies. It's just that the matter of which they are composed is of a cruder subtlety, a less subtle subtlety than our bodies. And then like the higher beings like Devas and Brahmas would be composed of much more subtle matter, have a finer vibration to it or something. And some people under certain circumstances, they're having a liminal moment or some such, they have access, they are like sensitive to subtleties of in their perceptual field that under ordinary circumstances most people are not sensitive to. So I really don't have a whole lot to say about shadow figures because I'm no authority on the subject. But I've never seen one myself. I have seen apparitions, but they were like full color apparitions. They were a little more substantial looking than just a shadowy presence moving across a wall, that sort of thing. And I mean, sometimes it can just be like a car driving by outside and a reflection or something is moving across the wall. I assume that does trick some people, especially people that already have the idea that maybe they're in a haunted dwelling or something. But I do not think that like shadow beings are impossible. I just think that they're sort of a bleed over from a cruder level of reality that some people under certain circumstances are capable of perceiving. So I think I'm just going to move on to the next question. And this is from Arain. And this one is in response to a video I did with Brian Rue last week about flat earthers. And our good friend Brian did an entire series of at least 10 videos in 1 week about flat earthism. And in one of them, he was more or less debating this guy called Flat Earth Dave. And I was looking at the comments. The comments, they seem more interesting to me than the video itself, because it was just like a verbal war going on in the comment section. And Brian Rue's comments, just BitChute comments in general, can be this way. But it was just back and forth. Like half the people in the comment section apparently were flat earthers, and the other half were globetards, because that's what flat earthers, if they're being derogatory, may call someone who believes that the earth is more or less of a sphere and not flat. So anyways, Arain here says, as a fellow globetard, I would like to know, if Buddhism teaches that the earth is flat and surrounded by a large wall on the edges to keep the water in, then who presumably built and maintains said wall? And according to ancient Indian Buddhism and ancient Indian cosmology in general, the earth is flat. They didn't really have a concept of what the cause of gravity was. They just assumed that there's a universal up-down orientation throughout the cosmos, so that all the flat planets, I guess you'd call it, all the flat worlds, would have the same up-down orientation throughout space. So the ancient Indian Buddhists had moved up in sophistication from the idea that the earth is the center of the universe, and the stars are just out there to help sailors navigate their vessels and so forth. They did accept that there are an infinite number of worlds out there, but they're all flat. They all have the same up-down orientation. And it's called the Chakavala, one of these flat worlds. It's called a Chakavala in Pali. And it's got like a 10 million mile high mountain in the center, which on our Chakavala anyway is called Mount Meru, or Sumeru sometimes it's called. And then on the outside, well, I'll just start from the center and work my way out. So you've got Mount Meru in the center. Then you've got some concentric mountain ranges that are inhabited by all sorts of fabulous beings. All kind of monstrous creatures live in these mountain ranges. And then you've got 4 continents: the southern, the northern, the western, and the eastern. And the southern one is inhabited by humans. And I assume the whole idea of the southern continent, with the mountain ranges and Mount Meru to the north, are based on Indian geography. The subcontinent just projects southwards from the Himalaya mountains. They assume that the Himalaya mountains were like one of the concentric mountain rings, that on the other side of that and the other side of some more mountain ranges would be Mount Meru. But anyways, then you've got oceans. You got some islands in the oceans, beyond the continents and in between the continents. And then at the outside edge of a Chakavala, you've got like a 10 million mile high, like mountain range, like a big wall. The purpose of which mainly is to hold in the water so that the oceans don't just flow off the edges of the flat world. And Arain is asking, who built and maintains the wall? And who built and maintains the wall is the same who that built and maintains the Chakavala, and the same who that built and maintains the entire apparently physical cosmos. The astronomical universe, it's all created by the same force, which is the collective karma of all the beings that live in this universe. And so the Chakavala that we live on, with its Mount Meru in the center and its concentric mountain ranges and the 4 continents and the ocean and the wall on the outside, all of that was materialized to the force of the karma of the beings destined to live on that Chakavala. And the karma itself is generated through ignorance or delusion. So, karma, which is a mental state, nevertheless has the ability to manifest physical matter according to ancient Indian Buddhism. Although later schools of Buddhism, more or less like with the philosophy of Kant in Western philosophy, realize that it just makes more sense that physical matter just doesn't exist. And so most of the Mahayana Buddhist schools, of the philosophical schools of Mahayana Buddhism, just did away with physical matter and have adopted a kind of philosophical idealism, which does make sense to me. I mean, if your karma is determining the world you live in and so forth, then rather than having your mental states actually create real physical matter, just if you're living in a mental universe, you don't have to bother with that. And it amounts to the same thing. It seems exactly the same. So it's a kind of very sophisticated dream world. But that is not what Orthodox Theravada teaches, or what Indian cosmology in the Buddhist time taught. So they've got the flat earth, and you can accept that or reject it as you please. So I'm just going to move on to the next question, which is the question I got to before having to start over. And this is from Siovaksh and Sipad Zidana. And Siovaksh and Sipad Zidana says, in normal everyday life, we experience sensory experiences simultaneously. But according to the Theravada Abhidhamma, since there is only one consciousness that takes one object, this simultaneous appearance is an illusion, and what is actually happening is instead that these things are flashing back and forth between different senses at trillions of frames per second. Since it takes 16 mind moments to make one full experience, it would take that long for it to possibly load the next conscious experience, which is another 16 mind moments. Maybe if the first experience was 16 mind moments of seeing someone, the next 16 mind moments would be hearing what they said. This seems like conscious experience would be very discontinuous, and there would be huge stretches of gaps in mind moments between any kind of conscious experience. Is this a correct interpretation of experience according to the Theravada Abhidhamma? Because if it is, I'm wondering how the mind is creating a seamless experience of each sense with such long experiences of conscious cessation. Even if it is happening so fast, it doesn't explain how the overall experience ends up resulting in 6 seamless streams of sensory experience that don't get jumbled up due to each fitting in the gap of the conscious stream. Well, this is kind of a technical question, isn't it? This Siovak and Sipad Zidana here is referring to the Buddhist philosophy of mind, or the Theravada Buddhist philosophy of mind. And it is true that Abhidhamma philosophy considers human mentality to be completely one-dimensional. It is linear. It's just one mind moment after another after another. You can't have like parallel processing in a human mind. It's all just one linear stream of mental states. And so I do think he's mistaken with regard to the 16 mind moments. If I recall, I mean, I've never considered this stuff to be very important because I haven't really believed it, but I think it's 17. I'm pretty sure there's 17 mind moments in a chitta viti, which is a stream of different mental states that occur in order for you to have one unit of conscious experience. So you start out with bhavanga, and then the bhavanga starts to vibrate, and then you have this sequence of mental states that are absolutely necessary for you to have a full mental state. And I don't know how anybody could know this, because, I mean, you wouldn't be able to see the intermediate mental states because it takes the full sequence of 17, I think, in order for you to perceive anything. So, I mean, it results in this problem of how you could possibly know what these intermediate states are in the sequence, because you couldn't possibly perceive them in a sequence. You could perceive maybe one of them in the middle of maybe somebody else if you're reading their mind, and that's only if mental states are not in sync with everybody else. It could be that when you're at mind moment number 3, somebody else is at mind moment number 6. And then if you have like really profound mind reading abilities, you could like zoom in on that number 6, or I guess it'd be number 3 or something. It'd be your first it would cause your first mind moment. And this is confusing. This is just really weird. And it's not even really necessary to fully understand it because it's probably not really true. So, I mean, it's all very problematic, this whole theory, and it probably got thought up by scholar monks at some Buddhist university or some big monastery, and maybe they weren't much into meditating, and so they just came up with theories on how the mind works and so forth. So, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's 17 mind moments equals 1 moment of matter. And so everything is flashing on and off. Matter is just flashing on and off like a trillion times a second, or a trillion times an eye blink. And the mind is 17 times faster than that, I'm pretty sure, if I remember my figures correctly. And it's just this sequence of mind moments that you have to go through all 17 to create like one unit of conscious experience. And then you move on to the next one, and then the next one. And you're like bouncing in between all these different things you're attending to, because you can only attend to one thing at a time. So you might have like a moment of like vision experience, and then a moment of like, let's say you're walking Maybe you're chewing gum or something. So then you have to have like a moment of some sort of, what's the word? Just a bodily experience. I can't remember the word. And then you're just bouncing around, like hearing and thinking and feeling and seeing, and then it all just kind of coalesces into what appears to be a multidimensional simultaneous experience. But again, according to Orthodox Theravada Buddhism, it is a one-dimensional linear sequence. So it's how it all merges together to seem like a simultaneous experience is explained mainly by the fact that it's just going so damn fast. 1 trillion times a second. I mean, there's no way anybody could be aware of, 1 trillionth of a second. I'm sure that psychologists or cognitive scientists have calculated out, they've experimentally verified, how rapid of an individual moment people are able to be aware of, and it's probably less than 100 per second. So it's all going to blend together into what seems like a multi-dimensional simultaneous experience, when really, according to Abhidhamma philosophy, the third Pitaka of the Tipitaka, that it's just one moment at a time, just one moment of vision, one moment of smelling, one moment of like tactile sensation, one moment of thought, and it's just one of all these different things that just kind of merge together. But it's kind of interesting that he's also talking about how there'd be gaps in between and why you don't notice the gaps. I mean, you can't notice any gaps of consciousness because it takes consciousness to be aware of something. So let's see. Let me try and find that part of the question here. Let's see. I'm wondering how the mind is creating a seamless experience of each sense with such long experiences of conscious cessation. There are no long experiences of conscious cessation. It'd be like 1 trillionth of a second in between each mind moment. And I mean, there has to be a mind moment. If you're alive, there has to be a mind moment every trillionth of an eye blink. So, I mean, the gaps in between these mind moments are just infinitesimally small. But it doesn't matter how much of a gap it is. It doesn't matter. It could be 100 years in between each mind moment. You wouldn't notice at all because you wouldn't be aware of the gaps. I mean, you can't be consciously aware of gaps in consciousness. They just merge together. Even the tiny little gaps in between mind moments, they just get canceled out because there couldn't possibly be any awareness of them, which causes one to think how these Buddhist philosophers knew that there was a gap in between, because they could not possibly be aware of any gap in between, because that would be a gap in consciousness. You can't remember what you never experienced. You cannot perceive what you literally are not experiencing. So the length of gaps in between would be pretty much irrelevant. But according to Buddhist philosophy, it'd be a tiny fraction of a 17 trillionth of a second. So, I mean, we're not aware of anything. A light could flash for 1/17 trillionth of a second. We would be oblivious to that because it would just be too fast for it to even register, probably. So, I guess I answered that question. But really, I mean, for me, one of the main philosophical interesting things about that question is you really cannot be aware of a gap in your own consciousness. I mean, you can infer it, like you go into a coma and you wake up 7 years later, then you're going to be aware not really of a break in continuity. You're not going to remember being unconscious for 7 years. But, I mean, things are going to be different, when you wake up again, and you're just going to infer, from what people tell you and so forth, that, oh, wow, I must have been unconscious for 7 years. But when it's 1 trillionth of a second, that doesn't happen. Nobody tells you that you were unconscious for 1 trillionth of a second. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is also from Siovakchin Sipad Zidana. And he says, you have said that maybe the formless meditations might have been added later. Later on in the development of Buddhist philosophy, he means. However, in the Parayana Vagga, which is considered to be as old as the Atthaka Vagga, there is mention of nothingness, which is rendered as formless attainment of infinite nothingness. What is your interpretation of it, if it means something else here? Here's the passage in English and Pali, which he includes, since you can understand it in the more older language. But you guys don't understand it in the more older language. So I'll just refer to my copy of the Sutta Nipata here, which is translated by K.R. Norman. It's the Polytext Society version. I've had this since before I was a monk. And it has alternate translations by Walpola Rahula and I.B. Horner. And the sutta he's referring to is Posala's questions, or the Posala Manava Pucha, which is Sutta 15 of the Parayana Vagga. And it says, according to K.R. Norman's translation, let's see, knowing the origin of the state of nothingness, he thinks enjoyment is a fetter. Knowing this, thus, when he has insight therein. Then he has insight therein. This is the true knowledge of that Brahman who has lived the perfect life. So the way he has it interpreted as knowing the origin of the state of nothingness. And because K.R. Norman is not really interested in Buddhist philosophy, he doesn't even try to pursue what that might actually mean. It doesn't make much sense to him. He's just a linguist. According to him, that's what the sentence says. So that's how he translates it. But there are alternate translations, as I said, according to I.B. Horner and or Walpola Rahula, who adopt a more traditional interpretation, like a more commentarial interpretation. They interpret it as follows. Knowing joy is a bond as born of the sphere of nothingness, knowing it thus emerging from that attainment of the sphere of nothingness. There he sees with insight that the sphere of nothingness is impermanent. This knowledge of that Brahman or Brahman who has lived the perfect life is real. And many, many years ago, I penciled in after that explanation, "Ack!" exclamation point, because all this stuff about the sphere of nothingness is just added in parentheses. It doesn't actually say that. It just gets added in as a kind of commentarial interpretation to make sense of the question. So it's not necessarily referring to a formless jhana state, but there is another one. I think I translated it in my Atthaka Vagga translation. I've got a few Parayana Vagga verses at the end. There are verses that do kind of emphasize nothingness. And like, what's it? The Upasiva Manava Pucha, which it says here, let's see, where is it? Beholding nothingness, possessing mindfulness, relying upon it is not. Cross over the flood. So that's another example in the Parayana Vagga of mentioning, nothingness as a kind of object of meditation. But I do think that this could have given rise to the idea of a formless realm of the sphere of nothingness. And I suppose I should explain to those of you who aren't not really well versed in arcane Theravada Buddhist philosophy. There used to be just what are called the four jhanas, which were like originally, in my opinion, the four levels of meditation, but then they got sort of transmuted into four absorption states that are superhuman mental states. And then because the Indian mind just is not content with accepting a highest level of anything really, they're always trying to outdo the highest. There's like, well, those guys believe that that's the highest, but we know of an even higher state. This happens a lot in Indian philosophy. Happens in the Upanishads also. So anyways, they came up with four meditations that are kind of annexes to fourth jhana, which are considered to be higher than ordinary fourth jhana. And then there's even states that are even higher than the formless realms that we don't need to get into. I've mentioned them before in previous Q&As. It's like they're just trying to outdo the highest and come up with an even higher one. So these 4 formless realms, which I haven't thought about in a while, hope I get them right. You got the sphere of infinite space, the sphere of infinite consciousness, the sphere of nothingness, and the highest and most subtle is the sphere of neither perception nor non-perception. And aside from the sphere of infinite space, there are verses that are referring to a more or less enlightened mental state in like metaphors that the other 3 can apply to. For example, the state of nothingness, there are 2 verses in the Parinavagga that are talking about, it is not or nothing. You're just meditating on nothing. And I mean, that could just go with the whole theme of the Atthakavagga, and one of the themes of the Parinavagga also, that you're just not supposed to have an object in your mind. You're not supposed to be perceiving. You're not supposed to have beliefs or views or perceptions in general. Your mind is supposed to be essentially void. Sort of like the Mahayanist idea of void. And so there are different ways of attempting to explain what really can't be explained very well. One of them is just referring to it as nothingness, or like emptiness would be another way of explaining it, although the Pali word is different. So, like, for example, the realm of neither perception nor non-perception, I think that could be, its origin could be a verse in the Atthakavagga, which would be in the Kalaha Vivada Sutta, where it's referring again to an enlightened mind. And it's saying, the first verse is, he has no perception of perception, he has no perception of non-perception. The next line is, he is not without perception, and he has no perception of void. According to my own interpretation anyway, my own translation of the Pali. So, I mean, that could give rise to the 4th formless realm, which is the realm of neither perception nor non-perception. And also the realm of infinite consciousness. I mean, I've discussed a couple times. There are 2 suttas, one in the Majjhima and one in the Digha Nikayas. And I'm probably scaring away beginners in Buddhism by having such technical questions, technical explanations right off the bat. But there is a fragment of a verse referring to Nibbana, apparently, as infinite formless consciousness. So what some of these scholars who are like developing orthodoxy were doing is they're taking all these descriptions of an enlightened mind, and they're standardizing what an enlightened mind is, but they've got these unorthodox sort of outlier explanations of an enlightened mind. And so they're saying, well, that's not really an enlightened mind. That's just a very advanced meditative state that they're describing. So I think that is possibly, maybe even probably, how the whole idea of formless jhana realms arose, is through older, no longer orthodox explanations of what the enlightened mind is like. And then when it's no longer orthodox, the formulators of orthodoxy, they can't just edit it from the canon. It was just too well known. There are other schools of Buddhism that would catch them on that. So they just have to kind of explain it away. I wrote an essay about this, which is no longer online. It'll eventually be up on my new website, which I think is pannobhasa.org. I think I would have preferred basedbuddhism.org, but the idea arose too late after the decision was made. So I guess I'll just move on to the next question here. This also is from Siovak and Sipad Zidana. And he says, according to Ajahn Thanissaro on stream entry, and he quotes Ajahn Thanissaro saying, quote, finally, you get as far as you can go in concentration, and you begin to realize the question comes up, there's stress or dukkha if I stay here, but there's going to be stress or dukkha if I move. And this is where it gets paradoxical. You neither stay nor move. There's no intention either way, because you realize whichever way you intend, there's going to be stress or dukkha or suffering, unquote. And it's in that moment of non-intention that things open up. And it's very impressive. No, this is still Ajahn Thanissaro. He's quoting within quotes, which confused me a little bit. And it's very impressive. It's not one of these things you say, gee, I had stream entry and I didn't even know it. It's earth-shattering. So that would be the real unquote. So maybe I should just say this. So, gosh. I keep looking at the battery charge to see if I'm going to run dead or something, because this recording software uses a lot of energy. So anyways, so Ajahn Thanissaro says, finally you get as far as you can go in concentration, and you begin to realize the question comes up, there's stress if I stay here, but there's going to be stress if I move, and this is where it gets paradoxical. You neither stay nor move. There's no intention either way, because you realize whichever way you intend, there's going to be stress. And it's in that moment of non-intention that things open up. And it's very impressive. It's not one of these things you say, gee, I had stream entry and I didn't even know it. It's earth-shattering. So that's the quote from Ajahn Thanissaro. And then Siovaksh and Sipad Zina follows up with, I know you don't believe in the 4 stages, but have you had an experience similar to this of nirvana? And first of all, I would say one of the things that really struck me with regard to this description by Ajahn Thanissaro is that I do not recall ever seeing anything remotely resembling this as a description of stream entry in the Pali Canon. This is just, it's like unique. I mean, it's not exactly unique for people explaining things, because, for example, it comes closer to a Zen Buddhist's explanation of Kensho than it does to any explanation of stream entry that I've ever come across before in decades of reading Buddhist literature. So it's Ajahn Thanissaro's own explanation, apparently, of what happened to him, maybe, in which case he's sort of indirectly claiming to be an Arya, which he probably shouldn't do, if only because it's against Vinaya to do that. It's against the rules of monastic discipline for a monk to admit to having attained superhuman mental states, which, according to Orthodox tradition, the same Orthodox tradition that's talking about 17 mind moments and trillionths of a second and flat earths and stuff, they're also saying that there are 4 stages of sainthood in Buddhism, and which I'm skeptical that the Buddha himself originated. I mean, he is the founder or the originator of that idea. So, yeah, it's a Zen-like experience that he's describing here, and I mean, it's definitely some kind of mystical insight where you're just transcending just rational thought. I mean, that'd be a very understatement kind of way of describing it. So I guess I should just answer the question, though. I don't need to do any elaborate commentary on Ajahn Thanissaro's explanation of what it's like to attain stream entry. But Siovaksh and Sipad Zirna says, have you had an experience similar to this of nirvana? And it's hard to put like really subtle meditative states into words. But I mean, I have had meditative states. I have gotten into certain kinds of meditative states where I had no doubt whatsoever that just 30 seconds of that would make 20 years of struggling and floundering and sweating and just being sick and everything, that it was all worthwhile. It was a bargain. It was really a good deal. That 20 years of struggling and floundering alone in a jungle is an equal trade-off, is a bargain for 30 seconds of this meditation, that's just crystal clarity, no thought. You're just wide awake and you're not thinking anything. And it's just like there's no boundaries. But whether that would be considered like a liberating insight, I'm not sure. It's like, because it seems like Ajahn Thanissaro here is describing some kind of liberating insight. And it also reminds me of Wu Wei in the Tao Te Ching, the just non-action. Because, he's saying that, you don't stay and you don't move. Which I think he might be referring to certain metaphors in early Theravada also. Like I think it's the very first sutta of the Samyutta Nikaya talks about you don't sink and you don't run, something like that. So, he could be getting the idea somewhat from that, or at least getting the idea of how to explain the situation from suttas like that, or metaphors like that. But he does seem to be explaining a kind of liberating insight. And I'm not sure that I've experienced that exact kind of liberating insight. I've had just very profound meditative states that can result in profound insights. And I think there's going to be a question a little later on that kind of touches on that. But I think different people are just going to have different experiences. I do not think that it's a cookbook sequence of experiences that you have to have in order to become enlightened. So I guess I answered that question. So I'm just going to move on to the next question here. And this is from Stellar Supreme, formerly known as Lieberlam. And Stellar Supreme, formerly known as Lieberlam, says, assuming we had a karma calculator, would it be worse for a person, given that this person has guaranteed lifetimes of hell according to the calculator, to cultivate good merit, in that it's just adding heaven realm lives before or after the hell realm lives, which would just be more deaths and tribulations for that person to go through? Well, I don't think it necessarily works that way. According to the suttas, if you've got bad karma and you're in danger of going to hell, or you're just in danger of going into one of the lower realms, or just having just bad things happen to you, the best thing you can do is dilute the bad karma with lots of good karma. So you should just do as much good as you can, refrain from doing evil as much as you can, to attenuate the bad karma that you've got. And I should move this microphone farther from my mouth, I think. So, I don't think that your good karma and your bad karma are segregated in that way. That really, if you've got bad karma that you may go to hell for, and you do a lot of good karma, that can just change the equation. Which reminds me of this story. You're just going to have to deal with my multitude of digressions. And those of you who watch my Q&As regularly know that at least half of my answers aren't even answering the question. I should say half of each answer rather than just half of the answers. But anyways, long time ago, a Burmese man told me this story about this guy who went to a fortune teller, and the fortune teller told him that he was going to die within a week. So he'd better get his stuff in order, because his karma, it was very clear, the signs were he was going to die. So he took off to see his family. They lived in, some village miles away. So he took off walking to go say goodbye to his family. And on his way to say goodbye to his family, he sees this pond that's almost dried up, and there's all these fish floundering in the shallow water. They're almost, they're within a short time, they're all going to die because, there's no rain, there's a drought or whatever. It's hot and sunny. The water's evaporating. So he took pity on them. It's like he took off his sarong or something, whatever he was wearing, and he just kind of made a bag and scooped up these fish, and then ran over to where there was a deeper pond and let them go in the deeper pond. And then he continued on his way with a wet sarong. And so he gets to his parents, makes their goodbyes. They're all crying and hugging each other, presumably. And then his expiration date comes and goes, and he's still fine. So he goes back to the fortune teller and says, "Hey, what's this about me dying? I'm not dead." And the fortune teller, he's just scratching his head because it was very clear that he was going to die. So he asks him, "Did anything unusual happen over the past week?" And just almost as an afterthought, he just happens to mention that he did save a pond full of fish that were dying. And then the fortune teller, it said, "That must be it." And I think according to the story, he stopped being a fortune teller and just became a Buddhist after that, because Buddhists aren't supposed to pay a lot of attention to fortune tellers anyway. But the thing is, it's not all set in stone. The whole point is that, no matter how bad the situation is, it can always get improved. And there are stories of people going to heaven and hell. It's like they do something bad that sends them to hell, and they also do something good that sends them to heaven, either before or after they go to hell. So they still had to go to hell. But if you have got better karma, and karma is a mental state, then you're going to be going in. Even if you do have to go to hell, the more good karma you've got, the less horrible it's going to be, and it's not going to last as long, for example. So it would have an attenuating effect on your stay in hell. And the more good you've got in you, the less, it's like the less badness is going to happen. Even though some badness will inevitably happen. So I'm not sure how well I answered that question, with or without the strange digression. So I'm just going to move on to Stellar Supreme, formerly known as Lieberlam's next question, which is, wait a minute. Oh, it's just a follow-up on the first question. Does this mean that good karma cannot reduce the weight of bad karma such that you can't have a watered-down hell or heaven lifetime, just the mental states and dukkha in accordance with a particular realm? Yeah, I think I already answered that one. So I answered both questions inadvertently. Hope that's okay, that I answered your second question before even reading it. So, yeah, no, it doesn't necessarily mean that. Different people are different, different people have different kinds of mental states, I suppose. So, yeah, it's going to be different for different people. And karma is so complex, so subtle that, you can't really calculate or predict with accuracy or precision, what exactly the result of a certain act or a certain kind of mental state is going to have. You can tell whether it's positive or negative as a general rule, or predominantly positive or predominantly negative, because it's almost all shades of gray in Buddhist ethics. It's virtually impossible to do something that is pure good or pure evil. There's always going to be a certain mix. Even to believe that you are doing something is delusional from a Buddhist point of view, which is going to have like a negative influence on your karma. So, just a desire for good karma. You do something out of a desire for good karma, still there's going to be a certain amount of delusion and just craving and so forth that are going to vitiate your good karma to some degree. And the same goes for bad. It's another virtual impossibility to do something that's just pure evil. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Never Forget 14. And Never Forget 14 says, traveling to places like Thailand, Japan, Korea, etc., I have seen beautiful temples adorned with swastikas. What does the symbol mean to you, and have you come across it with other monks' studies or travels? And yeah, the swastika, which is like, it's bent the other way from like the German National Socialist swastika. The German National Socialist swastika has the bends of the cross going one way, and in Buddhism and also Hinduism, usually the bends are going the other way. Although some wise guys can just take a mirror image of a picture of a Buddha statue. He's got like a swastika, like a Buddhist swastika on his chest, and they'll just mirror it so that it turns into like a German National Socialist swastika. But the swastika, the word swastika is Sanskrit. The Nazis borrowed the swastika from Indo-European religion, and mainly from India. And swastika literally means something like true benefit or like good welfare. It was just a good luck sign. And I think it may have originally been an image of the sun, although I'm not sure about that. And it was just like a good luck sign that was common. It was just sort of like a sign of blessing or something. And why the German National Socialists adopted that, I really am not sure. So, it's mainly just, it's sort of emotionally charged. It's got connotations. You see a swastika, that's like a hate symbol. There are probably like countries where it's illegal to even like make a swastika with chalk. In America, I'm sure in some places at least, it would be like a hate symbol. It's like you're making people feel unsafe by scrawling a chalk swastika on a sidewalk, for example. But, it's just lines. Ultimately, it has no power. It's just the emotional reaction of the person that looks at it that really has the power. So, what does the symbol mean to me? Well, it's like an ancient Indian symbol that was appropriated by others, and it was common throughout lots and lots of cultures. For some reason, swastika is just sort of an easy design to come up with. It's easy to make, but looks interesting at the same time. It has a certain aesthetic appeal to it, I suppose. And so, it may have originally symbolized the sun, but it just became just like a generic sign of blessing and good luck. So, I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Cleefy. And Cleefy says, I am observing derangement of Western society. Every day I come across people who are NPCs. There is no better explanation. It looks like people lost empathy. Ignorance became virtue. Common sense non-existent. How do I deal with this from a Buddhist point of view? Well, one thing to bear in mind is people have pretty much always been that way. There have been differences in cultures, and some cultures are more, they emphasize virtue and honor and so forth more than other cultures do. But for the most part, the majority of any civilization, any culture, any society are going to be normies. NPCs, they don't have many original thoughts, if any. They just follow along with what everybody else is doing. They follow along with what they're told from the people higher up. And they're mostly living in automatic pilot mode. It's like they never fully wake up. They just automatic pilot is good enough to get them through life, and that's what they're doing. And it's always been this way. Was this way in ancient India in the Buddhist time, probably. Maybe not to the same extent as now, but still, people are just, it's just the way most people are. So, it could be more that way now because the population is increasing, and so the ranks of humanity are being filled by beings that weren't human in a previous life and probably were like in a ghost realm or something. And, they just kind of moved up and they're not very good at being people yet. So that can happen, I suppose. But how do you deal with people that are normies or sheeple or whatever derogatory term you want to use, NPCs? I mean, they're just normal people, really. I mean, that's the way most people are, probably, as far as I can tell. And then, I mean, first of all, you just have some compassion. And also consider that animals are even worse off with regard to originality of thought and so forth. And we don't really despise animals because of it. You know, we don't despair of animals because they have no original thoughts in their head. You know, they just follow along with just their knee-jerk reflexes and so forth. It's like people, when they're that way, it bugs us more because they're more like us. You know, they're kind of reminding us that of our own humanity and making us kind of embarrassed to be members of the club or something. So, I mean, having compassion, you know, it's like they really are not choosing to be that way. It's just they're not awake enough to be otherwise. You know, they're doing the best they can, actually, which in a lot of cases might be a piss poor attempt at doing good. But I mean, they just, for the most part, they just don't know any better. I mean, they're not going to be inflicting themselves with suffering deliberately, just as a kind of enlightened choice. I mean, supposedly that would be possible, but for the most part, people, they just don't know how to be happy, and they just follow along with what they're told. You know, they just conform. So people like that who are just born into like a wisdom culture, like ancient India was, even Burma is to this day to some degree, they're actually better off that way because they're just sort of mindlessly conforming to something that is to their benefit, is going to help them to cultivate wisdom, you know, to cultivate their consciousness and so forth, at least a little bit. But when you've got like the normie, the person that just conforms, they're born into a spiritually bankrupt culture. I mean, that's not good for anybody. So, I mean, if you want to get real, just radical with how to deal with this from a Buddhist point of view, is you just renounce society. You just go off and live alone in a forest and meditate under trees. I mean, that would be the best way of dealing with unenlightened humanity. But if that's really not a viable option for you, then just try to have some compassion. Because, I mean, I used to despise the human race a heck of a lot more than I do now. And one reason for that is that I spent 30 years as a monk, with most of that time striving to perfect myself. And I realized that, I mean, you can't just decide to be an enlightened saint. It doesn't work that way. That, you know, even if you try to be like an awake, wise, good person, as a general rule, it doesn't work. You're pretty much stuck being who you are. So I got a lot more compassion for the human race by realizing that even if you just strive with all your heart to be an enlightened saint, that in all likelihood, it's still not going to happen. So people that are just like lost in samsara, lost in some spiritually bankrupt culture, I mean, they hardly have a chance. You know, they're just stuck. And so that makes them worthy of compassion in my idea. And according to my feelings, it seems like I have a lot more tolerance. I mean, except for on the highway. On the highway, I got no tolerance. But everywhere else, you know, I have more compassion and tolerance for people just because I know how stuck that they are. You know, even if they tried, they probably still couldn't be different than they are. Unless maybe it was just some sort of crisis just got slammed upon them and just slammed them out of the rut that they've been in their whole life. That can happen too. But it's usually pretty catastrophic for people that are just worldly minded normies to get slammed into a higher state of consciousness. It may take, you know, some terminal illness or horrible accident or something, or the death of, you know, half their family all of a sudden, or most of their families, something really, just really harrowing to just knock them out of this rut, because we're governed by habit, just like just any other animal. We are a species of animal. We're an upgraded ape, but still an ape. So, yeah, I mean, they just can't help it. I mean, that's the thing. And when you realize that from your own experience of when you're trying to help it, and still, I mean, it's not easy. That, I mean, you have more compassion for people that really haven't had much of a chance to even have a concept of enlightenment or the cultivation of wisdom, anything like that. So I guess I answered that question well enough. I guess. So I'm just going to move on to Cleefy's second question, which is, I tried to buy your books on Amazon, Kindle edition. However, Amazon does not sell your books to me because I am not in the US. Is there any other way to get your books? Well, that's a good question. And it turns out that different countries have a different Amazon website. Like in America, it's Amazon.com. I think in like the UK, it's Amazon.uk. Like Japan, I think it's Amazon.ja. Australia, it's like Amazon.au. So it may be that if you're in a country that has an Amazon specifically designed for your country, then you could get the books in that way. Otherwise, I suppose you could send me your email or send me your mailing address, and I can try to send you something. But otherwise, I mean, I'm not exactly sure how you go about it. I have been told that you can find my books on eBay. So it's possible you might be able to get it on eBay if eBay will send stuff to whatever country you happen to be living in. Apparently not the USA or California. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. And this is from Yuga-U. And Yuga-U says, lately I found out that I have a hard time explaining to people around me the purpose of my meditation. I'm doing mindfulness and samadhi. When I explain, I'm just being mocked. Can you help me? And then Yuga-U continues here. I'm doing meditation for over 10 years now, but I still have hard time with some very strong, unwholesome habits. I easily get irritated when things don't go my way, but it does not last long. But people around me are telling me that my meditation is worthless, but I'm the only one who sees its benefits. What to do? The more I do it, the less I care about my looks or what people think about me. I easily do jobs that others find boring. I criticize less and try to save and help as many creatures as I can. Are these not benefits of my hard practice? Well, I will tell you that, I mean, any effort has its results. Any efforts in Dhamma will have benefits, even if you don't notice them. Like, for example, let's just say that there's a guy, and in his backyards, there's this rock. And he keeps hitting that rock with his lawnmower. He wants to move that rock. So he goes out there and he just starts like pulling and pushing and tugging this rock that's in his backyard, and it won't budge. So this guy's stubborn. So he just makes it a habit every day. He comes out for like half an hour trying to move that rock. And he keeps trying for like, let's say 6 months. Every day he's out there straining and trying to push or pull or somehow budge that rock and get it loose so he can get it out of his yard. And finally, he just gives up in despair. He thinks, all this time has been wasted. He has made no benefit whatsoever, when really he's like buff now. He's been working out, trying to move that rock. And even though he hasn't moved it, because unbeknownst to him, it goes down like 16 feet. It's just the tip of this huge boulder that nobody could possibly move. So he thinks that he's not making any progress, and outwardly, at least with regard to moving the rock, he made no progress. But I mean, he's like in really good physical condition now. He's all muscly now because of all this futile struggling with this rock. And meditation can be that way. It's you may think that you're not making progress, but you certainly are. If you are doing real meditation, you're doing a verified traditional meditation technique that's taught in Buddhism, like anapana, meditation on the breath, for example. Then yeah, you're definitely getting benefits, even if you may not notice them yourself. And just to have like spiritually blind normies telling you that your meditation is worthless, I mean, what value is that kind of information? They don't know. They just, maybe to some degree, they might resent that you're trying to be better than them or something. But I mean, the people around you, I mean, you don't really have to explain that you meditate. I mean, don't be like a vegan and just announce to everybody that you meditate. Like vegans just, it's like a meme. They just have to announce to everybody that they're vegan. So, I mean, you don't have to do that. So it'd mainly just be people living with you that would know that you're meditating. Otherwise, I mean, you just keep your mouth shut, don't even talk about it. So with them, I'm not exactly sure how you deal with them. I'm not sure, what these people are like. But I mean, at the very least, meditation is a kind of mental calisthenics. It's like a mental exercise. It strengthens your concentration. It's good for your mind. Just even from a worldly point of view, if you describe it in that way, they may be skeptical that your concentration is any better. But I mean, you can't really let yourself be swayed by people that don't have a clue. When clueless people are criticizing something that they don't understand, it is really just noise. And I've got a dog having a weird dream behind me and making strange noises. Just a second. Hey, wake up. Yeah, you were having a dream, weren't you? Yeah. Okay. Oh, now she wants to say hi. Hi. There she is. Okay. You can go back down now. Okay. So, I guess I answered that question. Did I? Did I answer that question? See, the more I do it, the less I care about my looks. Okay. Are these not benefits of my hard practice? Yeah, I mean, it may not. I mean, even if you don't notice any obvious benefits, I guarantee you that there are benefits that, every action has its result, and a positive action is going to have a positive result. And it may not reach fruition until some point down the road when all of a sudden it'll become obvious. But at the very least, meditation, even at an elementary level, especially at an elementary level, is just kind of mental exercise that strengthens your mind, increases your self-discipline, increases your concentration. And to some degree, it increases your consciousness level, and sort of like the clarity of your mind. And just morality also is good for that too. Just morality, it's not that you're scoring points with, some being on a throne up in the sky somewhere. That morality is its own reward in a sense, that it just causes you to have just like a lighter, more worry-free kind of mind. At the very least. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from GameFap. And this is kind of a strange question here. GameFap says, thoughts on Antarctica mysticism. From lost pyramids to UFO landings. There are many theories that the Third Reich established a base there and will reemerge when the time is right. Any thoughts on Operation Highjump? So I guess that's kind of two questions. They're related. So Operation Highjump is question number 2 now. So thoughts on Antarctica mysticism. And I'm really not well informed with regard to Antarctica mysticism. I mean, there was some kind of temple down there where I think it was predators were like raising aliens to like fight, and people were worshiping them or something. There was a movie about that. So I saw that, but I don't think that's really applicable here because it's not particularly mystical, even though it was quasi-religious. So lost pyramids, yeah, UFO landings. Well, I guess there was, the movie The Thing. You had the UFO crash in Antarctica, but that's not particularly mystical either. I mean, Antarctica is just some unknown place on the frontier that you can just attribute any kind of weirdness to it. So it's like we can't say that, it's like the mysterious lands of the West or the mysterious islands, of this sea or whatever, because it's all on Google Earth now. It's all this stuff has been explored. People have been there and seen it, and there's no weirdness there, at least nothing obviously weird. And so people will just say, well, it's in Antarctica. That's where the weirdness is. But I'm skeptical. I mean, lost pyramids. I mean, who would build a pyramid in Antarctica anyway? What would be the point of building a pyramid in Antarctica? I don't think there's ever been a civilization, a human civilization in Antarctica. There were dinosaurs in Antarctica. There's penguins in Antarctica, but I don't think penguins are going to be building pyramids. I mean, UFO landings, maybe they might have had some sort of remote base there or something. But yeah, I mean, that would be just wild speculation. I don't know if there's any actual evidence to support any of this stuff other than just secondhand, or the kind of strange person that says, I worked for NASA and I know that they're doing this stuff, and they get to be on all kinds of YouTube videos and so forth, but they don't really produce any actual evidence. Nothing really convincing anyway. And with regard to the Third Reich, the Germans establishing a base in Antarctica, I doubt that just as much as I doubt that they have a base on the dark side of the moon, which is another theory that the Nazis went to the moon with their newly invented rocket ships and are just waiting there, or have long since died of like anoxia or something when they ran out of air. So yeah, I think Antarctica is pretty much of a barren wasteland mostly, and there could be weird stuff happening there, but I'm not aware of it, and I don't see any real reason to believe it other than just accepting a kind of agnostic, maybe, who knows, kind of an attitude. But yeah, I haven't seen any kind of evidence why I should think that Antarctica is any kind of mystical realm of weirdness with aliens and Nazis and pyramids and all that kind of stuff. So I'm just going to move on to GameFAP's second question here, which is, any thoughts on Operation Highjump? And I had no idea what Operation Highjump was, so I actually looked it up before this Q&A. And it turns out that in the late 40s, shortly after World War II, the American Navy was doing some setting up bases in Antarctica, largely just for like training for like very cold conditions, and like getting some territorial claims on Antarctica, and just doing like scientific research and stuff. And it may be that GameFAP is insinuating here that maybe they were down there to deal with the Nazis or something. But I think that there may have been some, politics in, America wanting its piece of the Antarctican pie, and also just setting up scientific bases, and it was only for a few years in the late 40s, I guess. So they apparently found that it wasn't worth their while to continue doing it. So, I mean, it wasn't really that big of a deal, I think. I mean, if you're into conspiracy theories, if you're sort of, you think in that way, then there might have been some kind of sinister motive for the Navy to be setting up bases in Antarctica. But I don't know exactly what it would be. I'm just as agnostic with regard to Operation Highjump as I am with regard to pyramids and UFO landings in Antarctica. I mean, I assume that there really were scientific bases there. There still are scientific bases in Antarctica where they're keeping track of, like the ozone layer over the South Pole and so forth. Or according to the flat earthers, it may be that they're just making sure that nobody goes over the edge and finds out that the earth is flat and goes back and tells the world about it. So those are my thoughts on Antarctica, I guess. And my nostrils are kind of plugging up on me somehow. Anyways, the next question is from Extremely Rare Bird. An Extremely Rare Bird says, I read about Bhante Jnanadeepa, who said anywhere between 3 and 5 hours sleep is a good amount, but one shouldn't try to force it. 6 hours would be too much. But if one is at the beginning of one's practice, one shouldn't worry too much if one is sleeping 6 hours. However, one shouldn't be pleased with that. And then Extremely Rare Bird says, I feel like trash if I don't get 7 to 8 hours. How can one train oneself to get by on 3 to 5 hours? And I can relate to this because before I became a monk, the ideal amount of sleep for me was like 9 hours. If I didn't get a full 9 hours sleep, I was a bear in the afternoon when I woke up. So then I became a monk, and according to like Theravada Buddhism, the ideal amount of sleep is 1/3 of a night, which would average out to like 4 hours or maybe a little less than 4 hours. And I tried that, and there was only 1 month in my entire life that I averaged less than 4 hours sleep per night. And that was during some of the best meditation of my life. I've even been in like intensive meditation retreats. I was at Pandita Rama once, and I was trying to sleep, I think it was 4.5 or 5 hours per night. And I was starting to hallucinate. I was starting to start dreaming before I went to sleep. It was like hallucinations. I'd be sitting there in the meditation hall meditating, and I'd just be dreaming all over the place. I've mentioned this before. I remember one time I'm in this living room, and there's a person standing in front of me, in front of a fireplace. This person is standing in front of me with their back to the fireplace, and they're like asking me a question. I'm getting ready to answer their question. Then finally I realize, whoa, wait a minute. I'm in a meditation hall in Rangoon. This isn't happening. And so what I did was I just started giving myself an extra half hour of sleep, which caused the hallucinations or the waking dreams to start only during the last meditation of the evening. But it was just, I just couldn't get by on that little sleep. It just wasn't working. I'm just a sleepyhead by nature. Different people have different constitutions, and some people need more sleep than other people. Some people get by fine with 4 hours sleep a night. And I met one Canadian guy who was really serious yogi. He was saying that, he feels sleepy all the rest of the day if he gets more than 4 hours of sleep. But as I say, I was only able to manage it, no matter how hard I tried, 1 month out of my 30 years as a monk. And that was during some of the best meditation of my life. So if you do a lot of like intensive meditation, then you don't need to sleep as much. To some degree, it either removes the amount of stress or thought or whatever that requires you to sleep more, or it's sort of compensating. Some of the benefits of sleep you're getting while you're like in a very tranquil, clear, subtle kind of mental state. I'm not sure which way it goes, whether the meditation is sort of taking the place of the sleep, or it's just somehow causing you to need less sleep in some other way. But that does seem to be the way it is with me, especially. It's like the better my meditation is, the less sleep I need. But nowadays, 8 hours sleep is good for me. That's, if I don't get that much, then I'm feeling kind of tired the next day. But I'm not doing any kind of intensive meditation like I was when I was a monk. So how can one train oneself to get by on 3 to 5 hours? It may be that you'd have to do really intensive meditation, but if you're just the kind of sleepyhead by nature that I am, then it just may be unrealistic, and you shouldn't beat yourself up over it. And you just accept the way things are. I mean, you can look in the suttas for ways to, reduce sleepiness. And the previous Q&A, somebody was actually including info from a sutta and also info from Ajahn Chah on how to overcome sleepiness. So there's ways of doing it, like sleep in a sitting position. I mean, it's pretty miserable, and if you have to function, especially at first, you got to work and have clarity of mind. You got to be able to concentrate and so forth. It may not work very well, but I experimented with sleeping in a sitting position when I was a junior monk, and I was excuse me, I gotta blow my nose or something. This is ridiculous. Okay, I think that's a little better. I've been told that Ajahn Chah would sometimes sleep in a sitting position with a bottle balanced on one knee and a glass balanced on the other knee, so that if he started moving around, they'd fall over and possibly break. So, I mean, it's, in a way, it seems counterproductive because, I mean, if you're a monk, you can afford to do that kind of stuff. But if you're a layperson, then you're just going to be a mess the next day, probably, especially if you're doing it for over a period of, many days or many nights, I should say. Then, yeah, you're going to be like lurching around like a zombie before very long. Even before I became a monk, I was trying to cut way down on my sleep. And yeah, I was like a zombie, just sleep deprived, just relatively severe sleep deprivation. And I knew one monk who just pretty much cracked up due to sleep deprivation. He was trying to do the sitting Dhutanga at the highest level, which meant he was trying to sleep in a sitting position, cross-legged, and he wasn't leaning back against anything. He was cheating a little bit. He'd take his alms bowl, put it in front of him, and then just lean forward and rest his forehead on that and sleep that way. And that plus all of his other austerities, he thought it was mainly the sleep deprivation, caused him to just have like a breakdown. So you don't want to push it too much. If your body really needs the sleep, then you should give your body what it needs. That's just common sense, whether Bhante Jnanadeepa approves or not. But there are certain ways to get by on less sleep. And the best way that I know of getting by on less sleep is to do lots of intensive meditation. But it has to be good meditation. The deeper you get into meditation, the less sleep you need. So I'm just going to move on to extremely rare birds. Next question here, which is, I feel calm and happy most days now, and my meditation is quite stable. However, every night I keep having intense and weird dreams or violent nightmares, mostly unpleasant and or confusing. I wonder why this keeps happening. The Buddha recommends metta for improving sleep, but it doesn't seem to help me much. Would you know of any potential cures of this problem? Well, that is kind of an interesting problem. That you're kind of well balanced and everything during the day, and then you have bad dreams at night. It could be a kind of like equilibrium thing. Maybe you're just a little too positive during the day, so that the negative has to arise, through the subconscious mind when you're sleeping. Making sure here, 10% on battery. So, that's a possibility. Maybe if you had more negative thoughts, I'm not advising this, but maybe you had more negative thoughts during the day, then you'd have less need to have them at night. But I did have this kind of problem when I was a kid. And around the same time, when I was still having the bad dreams, we were playing around with a Ouija board. And the Ouija board told me that I had this guardian spirit. And it told me the guardian spirit's name. And I was inspired to just ask my guardian spirit before I would go to sleep at night. While I'm already in bed, my head's on the pillow, then I'd sort of silently request that my guardian spirit would just help me have good dreams. And it seemed to work, even if it was just like the placebo effect or whatever. So maybe, if you're the praying type, you can pray to, some higher being or beings. Or, if you've got like a guardian spirit, which in Burmese is called the Ko-Sautnat, which is like the deva who is like protecting you. Something like that, it might work. But yeah, I'm not sure otherwise how you would deal with that. I don't really have a lot of personal experience. I do have weird dreams sometimes, but I haven't had any really bad dreams in very, very long time. I know I've had like weird disorienting dreams, or like the person chasing you through an airport, or something like that. You're just ducking in there and you're hiding, and then they always find you. So that kind of dream I've had, but I haven't had really bad dreams since I was a kid, probably. Not very many of them anyway. So I am sorry if I can't really just tell you the cure, because I don't really know. But when I was a kid and I did have a problem with bad dreams, it was just sort of like supplicating my guardian spirit to watch over me and help keep me from having bad dreams. And in my case, it seemed to have a positive effect. So I'm just going to move on to Extremely Rare Bird's next question, which was kind of an easy one. Some of these questions have not been very easy. Just explaining what the question means, especially towards the beginning there, was not easy. But this one's fairly easy. How was the bed you used as a monk in Burma? Well, over my 20-something years in Burma, I had a number of beds. The one that I slept on the longest was at a One Bo Wildlife Refuge monastery. It was inside of a cave I called Tepo Guha. And it was just a wooden pallet. And most monk beds are a wooden pallet. It's just, it was like this thick, made out of wooden planks. And then over the top of that would be like a straw mat, or like a bamboo mat, or maybe a rush mat. It was just sort of it was maybe like an 1/8 of an inch thick mat over the top of that. And then because I'd sweat so much, I'd have to put a cloth over the top of that. For a while, I was using just an opened up burlap bag and using that as a kind of bedspread. And my pillow for many years was just my soap case that I'd wrap like a wash rag around it, and it was like this thick. I just used that as a pillow. And then somebody offered me some cotton wool in a bag for medicinal purposes, and I never used cotton wool for medicinal purposes, so I just wrapped it in cloth and started using that as a pillow, which was a pillow about yay big. And yeah, that was about it. The burlap, when I was using the burlap as a bed sheet, it was so rough, I'd have to like lift myself up and kind of turn over up in the air and then ease myself back down again in order to turn over at night. And then sometimes I just like sleep on concrete floor. I spent a lot of times in that cave, especially, just sleeping on a concrete floor with a piece of wood for a pillow. And it wasn't to be an ascetic. That was literally the most comfortable way of sleeping, because it was so hot that just sleeping naked on a concrete floor was the coolest way of sleeping. And then sometimes if your body would or my body would like warm up the concrete and I'd start sweating again, I'd have to scoot down a little farther down the corridor where the concrete was still coolish, and then go back to sleep again. And the piece of wood for a pillow, that was just to keep the pillowcase from just soaking in sweat and becoming foul like an old gym sock. So yeah, when I was out in the woods, sometimes I just have like a little piece of plastic or something. I just spread out on the ground and sleep on that with the soap case wrapped in a piece of cloth as a pillow. easily washable piece of cloth. So yeah, beds in Burma tend, even lay people mostly sleep on a wooden bed with just a few like bamboo mats over the top of that. So they're sleeping on a very firm bed. Even like Burmese villagers, you get to, rich people in the cities, they're probably sleeping on a Western style bed. So anyways, I'm going to move on to the next question. I'm just checking the stats here. Okay. This question is from Mary J. And Mary J says, to start a new Buddhist school, what do you have to do? I don't mean tradition like Thai forest tradition, but a new school like Theravada or Sarvastivada. And I guess there's two answers to that question. There's like the old Asian traditional answer, and then there's like the new modern Western answer. The old Asian traditional answer would be you'd pretty much have to start a schism in the Sangha. And a schism in the Sangha is where you've got, the technical definition of a schism in the Sangha, or a Sangha Beda, is you've got two Sanghas, or two groups of at least 4 monks, doing like formal acts of the Sangha in the same Sima, just separately. You've got this group like doing their ceremonies separately from this other group doing their their ceremonies in the same area. That would be a Sangha Beda. They're not doing their ceremonies together. They're doing their ceremonies separately. And so that would be like a schism. And, then they can just sort of take their own direction. But starting a schism in the Sangha, that's one of the 5 things that will guarantee you of hell, according to Orthodox tradition. There's 5 things you do these, and you're guaranteed of hell. One is killing your mother, killing your father, killing an enlightened being, or injuring a Buddha so that he bleeds, or starting a schism in the Sangha. And then there's one alternate version where it's raping or seducing a nun is also one of the 5 things, or one of the things anyway, that will land you in hell. So if you wanted to start a new school, you'd have to get a schism in the Sangha going, and then instead of reconciling, then you just go your own way and just have your own favorite philosophical teachings and just proceed in isolation until you've drifted far enough away that you're obviously different even to the casual observer. But the new way of doing it, I guess, in the West is just declaring we're starting a new school of Buddhism, and then have enough people go along with it that it becomes like a movement. We're starting, queer rainbow Buddhism, and it doesn't matter if, what any kind of monks say, we're just doing it. That would be like the new Western way of doing it. So anyways, according to Orthodox tradition, in order to start a new school of Buddhism, you're going to go to hell. You have to do something that will land you in hell. So don't do it. I would advise you not to start a new school of Buddhism. There's enough schools already, really. So anyways, let's see. If you don't accept the teachings of any school, you can't 100% agree with any of the schools of Buddhism, then you can just sort of, follow the best you can and not start a new Sangha that's doing their ceremonies separately from another Sangha in the same place. So, my nostrils are misbehaving again. It's kind of strange. So anyways, Mary J's next question is, do Tibetan lamas have ordination or apostolic succession? I don't know the word, going back to the original Sangha. So it'd be like, an unbroken lineage, I guess. And I assume that they do. That, there were Sangha Bedas or schisms over the course of the early history of Buddhism. And one of those branches eventually wound up. You had some member of the branch going to Tibet I mean, it happened on a number of occasions. I think Buddhism was brought to Tibet more than once, which helps to account for the different schools of Buddhism in Tibet right now. But I would assume that all of them originally go back to Gautama Buddha, that there would be some sort of unbroken lineage of monks going all the way back to the Buddha. It's just that, that doesn't necessarily mean that Tibetan Buddhism is like validly representing what the Buddha taught, because there's all this mutation going on over time. Everything is impermanent, including the Sangha, including just the teachings of Buddhism itself. It's all subject to change over time. So, yeah, I assume so. So I'm just going to move on to Mary J's third question, which is, in Majjhima Nikaya 115, it is said that the Arya cannot do 5 or 6 things: murder their own mother, murder their own father, kill an Arahant, injure the Buddha, make a schism in the Sangha, and find a new teacher other than the Buddha. There is nothing about the Arya can't tell a lie. Is Arya able to tell a lie? Well, elsewhere in the suttas, you're going to find lists of what Sotapannas can and can't do. Like a Sotapanna can't break any of the 5 precepts. And so it's kind of strange that there are lots of people who consider themselves to be Sotapannas who break some of the 5 precepts, including monks who will they'll tell bogus confessions. They'll essentially tell a lie when they're making confession, because when you make confession, you say at the end, "Yes, sir, very good, sir, I will restrain myself." It's like, I have committed such and such offenses, and such and such number of such and such offenses. And then the other monk says, "Do you see them?" And then the first monk says, "Yes, I see them." Then the second monk that you're making confession to says, "In future, you should restrain yourself." And then the monk making confession says, "Yes, sir, very good, sir, I will restrain myself." And monks, even who consider themselves to be Ariyas, will make that confession knowing full well they're not going to restrain themselves. They're just going to keep breaking the same rule, like handling money or whatever the rule is that they're breaking. So either they are deliberately telling a lie, or they're just saying mindless blah, blah, blah in the Pali formula of making confession, which is not exactly honest. I mean, at the very least, it's just mindless babble. So, yeah, there are other suttas saying that, like, a Sotapanna cannot break any of the 5 precepts. He cannot have doubts about Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, and so on. He's even gone beyond self-view. He no longer has Sakaya Ditti, which is, belief in an individual self. So, yeah, there's lists other than in Majjhima Nikaya 115. Majjhima Nikaya 115 is just talking about what someone with right view can and cannot do. So, it doesn't specifically mention Sotapannas. I'm pretty sure it might. But elsewhere, you'll find lists of what the different 4 stages can and can't do. And even a Sotapanna cannot break any of the 5 precepts deliberately. You can sneak him something laced with alcohol and he might drink it, but he wouldn't do it deliberately. He might accidentally step on a bug when he's walking, but he wouldn't stomp on one on purpose. That kind of thing. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from the proto-pseudo-monk, who sometimes goes by the name of Cool Whip. And the proto-pseudo-monk says, "Can you please elucidate how 4th jhana is different from a trance state and how it leads to nibbana?" Man, my nostrils are just not cooperating today. It's not even funny. So, can I please elucidate how 4th jhana is different from a trance state and how it leads to nibbana? Okay, well, 4th jhana, if you go by orthodox tradition, it kind of is a trance state, to the extent that, it's like you go into a kind of suspended animation, where you become like a hibernating squirrel. You're oblivious to everything around you. Your heart rate and your breath rate almost stop. And my father, who was a hypnotist, said that someone in a deep hypnotic trance, it's the same way. They're oblivious to everything around them except for maybe the voice of the hypnotist. And their heart rate and their breath rate almost stop. They become like a hibernating squirrel. So I do think that what a lot of people consider to be jhana is essentially a kind of hypnotic trance state. But I think that real fourth jhana is different from a trance state in that you should not be oblivious to everything around you. That you're actually more conscious than when you're not meditating. That it's, according to the descriptions in the text, fourth jhana is purity of mindfulness. It is pure mindfulness. You are more aware than at any other time. But you're not thinking anything. Your mind is empty. So you're just wide awake, fully aware, and your mind is silent. So how does it lead to nibbana? There's different ways it can lead to nibbana. First of all, it's a fairly easy insight to attain, in that if you identify with your thoughts and then finally you experience a state in which you're wide awake and you're not thinking anything and you're still there, more or less, sort of, then, that's an insight that, if you stop thinking, you're not just going to be unconscious. That who you are is not your thoughts. So that was a fairly easy kind of insight that can arise from just a meditative state where you stop thinking. But there is one of my favorite suttas in the Majjhima Nikaya is the small discourse on voidness. And it talks about how a monk cultivates voidness or emptiness. And the first step is you go out into a forest where it is devoid of all the commotion going on in the village, and it's devoid of all these artificial rules that have to be followed. It's just the natural state of a forest. And then you start meditating, and your meditation objects becomes more and more subtle until finally, according to the sutta, you reach the signless concentration of mind, which is one of those states that's supposedly even higher than formless jhana. And then when you come out of that state, which is presumably, based on the context, the highest cultivatable mental state there is, you come out of that state and then you realize, even that is a conditioned state. It had a beginning and an end. It had a cause, and then, it started and then it stopped. So even the highest possible meditative state that can be attained is still not it. And then what happens is you get this insight where it's sort of like what Ajahn Thanissaro was talking about in the quote that in a previous question, where you just hit this, it's like the old tilt sign on a pinball machine, or the old error sign on an old calculator, where it's like it just kind of jolts your mind into like this different plane of understanding. It's like you're trying for enlightenment, and then you finally realize that nothing you do is going to be it. And then that just somehow causes you to just, in a way, give up and let go of samsara. So that is how it can lead to nibbana, but the different insights may be different for different people. So I'm just going to move on to the proto-pseudo-monk's next question, which is, what is your view on how normies, fools, sheeple, greedy, ignorant, delusional, stupid idiots live their lives, and how to live amongst them? Any advice for this lost world? Well, I've already pretty much answered this, essentially the same question previously. I can't remember who asked it, but my view on how normies live their lives, well, they're conforming, they're following along, and also they never fully wake up, and so they're in automatic pilot mode. It's just sort of knee-jerk reflex, or just habit, force of habit is governing their lives. They don't have much for independent thought or original ideas. And so how you live amongst them. I mean, it's pretty much like I explained the last time. It's like I have a lot more compassion for people now, a lot more tolerance for normies now, after being a monk for 30 years and trying to become a perfected saint and realizing just how difficult that is, if not impossible, because we're pretty much stuck being who we are. And so when even if you try to become a perfected saint and you can't do it, how is somebody else, how do they have any chance at all when they don't even have the concept of the possibility of that? You know, in a way, it's just, I mean, I can't help but feel a certain compassion for them. But still, everyone has like this spark of consciousness. I mean, everybody has consciousness. I mean, I almost said a spark of divinity, which is kind of what it is. I mean, everybody has this spark of divinity. And the more wise you are, the more you see that in others. You know, it's like if you're a fully enlightened being, or let's say you're a fully enlightened Hindu, let's say Neem Karoli Baba back there on the altar. Let's say he was a fully enlightened Hindu, and he just looks around and sees that everybody's just a manifestation of God. I mean, in Buddhism, you'd see it somewhat differently, but still, it would have the same effect. You know, it's like there's nobody or nothing in reality to despise. Because, I mean, the parts of us that are like dumb and ugly and unenlightened is just the illusory part. That's not the real part. So the wiser you are, the more you see just stuff to respect in others, or to have love for, or compassion for, that sort of thing. But really, I mean, normies, they just can't help but be normies. Most of them have the zero concept of anything but being normies, other than just being dead. I mean, those are their two choices, be a normie or be dead. I mean, there's enlightenment doesn't mean anything to them. I mean, they might never hear the word enlightenment. So, I mean, just try to get along with them as best you can, you know, just, you know, keep your precepts, don't lie, you know, don't just get pissed off and abuse them to their face, because that would be a kind of wrong speech also. That's parusa vacha, or abusive speech. So just, yeah, I mean, that's my view on how normies live their lives, is just kind of what I've already been saying. So this is the second time on that one. Any advice for this lost world? Well, I mean, in a way, it's always been this way. And we are where we need to be. We are where our karma has landed us. So we're here for a reason. So we shouldn't just waste it and just fail to learn anything. Just keep our eyes open and try to be as awake as possible. Try to cultivate our own mind as well as we can. And just have compassion on people that are less fortunate than us, which includes the NPCs. Because they're not total NPCs. I mean, everybody's got some spark of consciousness to them, some spark of originality. I mean, I don't think anybody could be without any intuition or creativity or like imagination at all. I mean, they'd just be like soulless vampires or just robots or something. So everybody has at least a little spark of divinity. And I guess we can, I mean, that's like the most important part of them. And so I guess you can emphasize that part and have a little more compassion. I mean, I saw a little, what do you call it, inspirational sign once at a monastery saying, you cannot hate someone that you understand. And I think that's kind of true for me. I think I understand people better, so I hate them less. I used to really despise the human race, which is one of the reasons why I was able to become a hermit monk. But my years as a monk has mellowed me on that score to some degree. So I hope I answered that question, because I'm moving on to the next question regardless. Also from the proto-pseudo-monk, which is as follows. What has been the greatest discoveries in your life? The paradigm-shifting moments of profound insight, experiences, thoughts, or events that changed the trajectory of your life and that has led to seeing the truth. I am precognizing we will hear about The Trickster and the Paranormal by George P. Hansen. And he's got kind of a smiley face thing. I haven't really thought on this, and maybe I should have given it some thought before doing the Q&A and like written down a list or something. But I can say that possibly the first real paradigm shifting moment of my life that I can remember was when my dad took me to see Planet of the Apes with Charlton Heston at the movies when I was a little kid. I was maybe 5 years old. And that was really a paradigm changer for me. Just seeing humans as not some godlike being that really understands, but is really just sort of, at the same level as just intelligent apes or something. Another one that was similar was reading The Naked Ape by Desmond Morris when I was about 14. That was really a paradigm shifter for me, because that's when I really started viewing human beings as a species of animal, just laden with instincts, just like any other mammal. So there was that. Let's see. Just being converted to Buddhism, which was caused by reading Zen Flesh, Zen Bones by Paul Reps when I was in college. I heard about Buddhism a lot from my father, who considered himself to be a Buddhist, but that was my first real exposure to it. I guess even before that, a major paradigm shifting moment in my life was when I was like 16. I just rebelled, almost flunked out of school, was an honor student, and then all of a sudden I'm just flunking out of school, getting in lots of trouble, and just partying all the time. And so my father, in one evening, in a towering rage, told me that I was going to have to see a youth counselor, or I was just going to have to move out, just hit the road. So I opted for the youth counselor, who it seemed the easiest way to go about my father's ultimatum. And he turns out that he was a spiritual guy, and he started giving me Ram Dass books to read. And that was a paradigm shifting moment for me, is just being exposed to this whole other world. First there's just the world of the normie. You just get an education and you get a job and you get a wife and you get a house and then you get some kids and then you cultivate your yard to perfection. You just have this perfect lawn, like some of my neighbors at the present moment. There's two neighbors. I've got two neighbors that mow their lawn every day. And so, that was like the first option in life. Then the second option is just rebel against that and just party, get drunk, get high, do whatever you want, just go wild. And that is not sustainable either. You get in a lot of trouble and you might have a lot of fun, but you have like an equal and opposite amount of the opposite of fun. So that's not sustainable. And then all of a sudden, I'm reading this Ram Dass book, and Ram Dass had like this contagious enthusiasm, like a good teacher has. And I didn't really understand it when I was reading it, because it was so alien to anything that I had come across before that, it was just kind of over my head. But still, just intuitively, I could feel that there was something worthwhile in that, better than, the normie approach of like a salmon, of swim upstream, spawn and die, or just like partying, getting into trouble all the time, just going wild. There was something valuable in that. And I gradually I was fascinated by it and kept studying it until finally it started sinking in better. I started acquiring enough knowledge of Eastern spirituality that I was able to start integrating it into my understanding in a way that pieces would start coming together. And it was just shortly after that, like I was 17 years old, is when I made my resolution of someday renouncing the world and striving for enlightenment. Because you got these books saying, all you have to do is live this certain lifestyle and do these spiritual practices, and you can become, like, if not omniscient, I mean, you see reality face to face. It's like, not just seeing God face to face, but merging with God. And if it's possible, I mean, it's like seems like a sacred duty to at least give it a shot. So, I mean, that was definitely a paradigm changer for me, is just being exposed to Eastern spirituality. A lot of books. I mean, I've talked about certain books. I've already mentioned a few, just in this answer. Like Desmond Morris and Be Here. No, it wasn't Be Here Now. It was Grist for the Mill. Was the first Ram Dass book that I ever read, and then Zen Flesh, Zen Bones. Reading an old translation of the Sutta Nipata. I think it was by a man named Fausbold. And the translation was like from the late 1800s. I think that was mainly what converted me to Theravada. Reading the Sutta Nipata about this tough as wood forest ascetics just wandering around, just indifferent to heat and cold and hunger and thirst, and just going for it. That was definitely a life changer for me. And I tried to emulate those wooden, tough as wood ascetics for many years. So let's see. Paradigm shifting moments, profound insight experiences, thoughts or events that changed the trajectory of my life. Well, I mean, I have had some profound, insightful experiences as a monk that I think also would change. I've described them before. I don't want to go into detail again on that. But, like I mentioned earlier on in this Q&A, there have been times I've had meditative experiences where just 30 seconds of that is well worth 20 years of struggling and floundering. And even though it passes, everything has a beginning, has an end, still it's there. It's like something you can refer to. Or even just like taking LSD for the first few times. Even that was a paradigm changer, because it was giving you insights into other ways of interpreting reality that as a normie you didn't have. It would, at the very least, it gave you this alternative way of seeing the world, and realizing that the usual way of seeing the world that the normie has is not necessarily the only way or even the best way. So let's see, what else? I guess that's probably enough. Plus, of course, I read The Trickster and the Paranormal by George P. Hansen, which really explains paranormal phenomena in a very elegant way that I like very much. And I think there's a very good chance that George P. Hansen is correct on that score. So I'm just going to move on to the next question now. This is from Skuladin or Skuladin. And he says, could you compare traditional Eastern-inspired religious spiritual systems to their Western globalist reinterpretations that suit their own purposes, like warrior Zen to corporate Zen, New Age to First Earth Battalion, or shamanism to MK Ultra, and so on? Well, the only one that really seems like a really good match would be warrior Zen to corporate Zen. I have read that the Musashi's Book of Five Rings was very common reading among like corporate elites back in like the 70s and 80s at least, where you just adopt the Bushido approach to being a cutthroat business tycoon. With regard to New Age, going to First Earth Battalion, I don't know. It just seems to me that Jim Channon, who started the First Earth Battalion, was just kind of a weird guy, and was maybe inspired in his weirdness enough to actually persuade some army brass to like let him experiment with some weird ideas. But let's see here. And then shamanism to MK Ultra. I assume that's just like mind-altering drugs. So Skoladin is asking me to compare traditional inspired religious systems to their Western globalist reinterpretations that suit their own purposes. Well, as a general rule, I mean, the modern West is very eclectic. It's willing to accept what works from just various different cultures. And that is actually a strength. Like, that's one reason why Rome was as strong as it was in ancient times, is because they had the wisdom or the pragmatism to know that if like one of their enemies had some technique in warfare that was very effective, they adopted that. Or they had some other technique or even some god that they worshipped or something that seemed to be beneficial. The Romans weren't so conservative. They'd just say no. They'd say, all right, let's try it. So actually, it is kind of good to be eclectic, but what is happening in the modern or postmodern West is that it's like inspired spiritual traditions are just being hijacked for worldly purposes. Like a good example that Skoladin hasn't mentioned is using mindfulness as a stress reduction technique. Like there are hospitals throughout the West that teach essentially Buddhist mindfulness, but it's translated into more Western psychological terminology. And the purpose isn't enlightenment. It's not even really so much the cultivation of wisdom. It's allowing people to deal with chronic pain or impending death, like a terminal's case. So, they're taking it and using it for like therapeutic purposes at a worldly normie kind of level. And it's kind of similar with warriors and business executives reading Musashi's Book of Five Rings. With regard to the First Earth Battalion, I really don't know that much about it, although I did see the movie The Men Who Stare at Goats. I think that was the title of it, with George Clooney and some other heavy hitter actors in it. But I guess the next question is about that in particular, so I won't mention that so far. But with regard to shamanism, I'm sure that drugs have been used for good and for ill for a very long time, long before MK Ultra came along. Just drugging people in bars and then shanghaiing them so that when they wake up, they're already at sea as a sailor. That kind of thing. I mean, that happened a lot. Truth serum has been used long before MK Ultra. Just getting people drunk in order to use them in some way or exploit them in some way. That's been around for a long time. But generally, the trend is that you take some kind of spiritual or religious technique and then just translate that into something like worldly, and sometimes it really does work. Like I'm sure that some business executives have benefited from reading Musashi's Book of Five Rings, or a lot of people have benefited. People who are not Buddhists, have no desire to strive for enlightenment or any such thing, nevertheless have used Buddhist meditation techniques, especially mindfulness techniques, to cure themselves of like OCD. Certain mental illnesses or mental disorders can be at least much reduced through mindfulness techniques. Also, the chronic pain and all that. So, we're living in a spiritually bankrupt age. And so, the spirituality is stripped away from techniques that are still useful in other ways. I mean, it can still be spiritual. It's just sort of like backdoor spirituality where you don't even notice that you're practicing a spiritual technique. So I guess it's kind of a hard question for me to answer. I can't really relate to the question very well, or at least I can't come up with very many ideas. So I'm just going to move on to Skoladin's next question here. Would you kindly give your expert opinion on Jim Channon's attempt at creating an Ubermensch super soldier? He wrote a manual or pamphlet called First Earth Battalion that's mostly graphical which explains it. It's free to download on the Internet Archive as a PDF. It's probably on YouTube as well. Yeah, I saw a PDF version of it online. I didn't want to go through the whole manual before doing the Q&A though. So I'm going to rely to some degree on the movie, The Men Who Stare at Goats, which I assume has some historical accuracy. But apparently Jim Channon was this new agey kind of guy who was trying to use the military as a way of just bringing peace to the world. I'm not sure about like exploding a goat's heart by staring at it. What I picked up from watching the movie, this was a few years ago, I don't really recall it very clearly, but they came up with a kind of technique that really does work, and I've been using it throughout most of my life, of just defusing a hostile situation. Like you're face to face with someone who just wants to just beat you up or just mess you up. You know, he's really hostile. And what you do is you just remain calm and just, you don't cause any kind of feedback loop. You know, you just remain neutral, and it's his anger or whatever without any kind of feedback it just runs its course. It just peters out. It's not sustainable. And so that was one of the methods in the movie that these guys were doing, is just when they're in a situation where somebody wants to kill them or something, they would just go into this state of neutrality, which would not give any kind of feedback at all, positive or negative, one way or the other, to the person who is aggressing, you know, towards them or feeling aggressive towards them. And in a lot of cases, it'll work. I mean, if somebody's like pointing a gun at you and preparing to pull the trigger in a battlefield situation, they're probably just going to pull the trigger anyway. But it's adopting new age methods where, I mean, I looked at the Wikipedia article where it was saying that the uniforms of this First Earth Battalion had a ginseng regulator on it and stuff like that. I mean, that's just kind of new age silliness, I think. But, you know, the army, I guess some of them are open-minded enough to at least experiment with weird ideas. I don't think they ever really did much with it, because I really doubt that a pacifistic army is going to accomplish very much other than, you know, like disaster relief, something like that. But in an actual war, to have a bunch of flower children soldiers who remain non-violent, I really don't think that was going to work very well. And apparently it didn't, because the army hasn't suddenly switched over to that. I mean, they kind of switching over to that in a different way indirectly nowadays, just becoming people that are, I mean, aside from some trained elites, you know, special forces and so forth, you know, the run-of-the-mill soldier may not be much of a soldier anymore. But still, it's a far cry from, you know, new age militarism. So let's see. Would I kindly give my expert opinion on Jim Channon's attempt at creating a super soldier? Yeah, I mean, what he's trying to create isn't so much a super soldier as just someone who is beyond violence and who is able to resolve hostilities through, like, metta, just generating love or something. And yeah, I mean, when you're up against like an indoctrinated communist normie who's just going to shoot anybody on the other side that he sees, I don't think it's going to have much benefit, to tell you the truth. Much less somebody sitting in a computer room launching cruise missiles or something. So I guess that's my expert opinion, if you can call it an expert opinion. And so I'm just going to move on to Skeladin's next question here, which is, are there any roles that animals play in religion or spirituality that are not related to blood sacrifice? There seems to be a lot of examples of people exploiting animals being exploited as animals or sacrificed to animals, like Jim, who became famous for staring at a goat in an attempt to teach military recruits how to explode people's hearts, which somehow jump-started his corporate career as the Fortune 500 guru. Well, I mean, exploding people's hearts seems pretty violent. And I mean, if you really want to explode people's hearts, you'd probably be better off just shooting them in the heart with maybe an explosive bullet. So yeah, that's kind of it just seems anomalous compared with what I have seen and read about, these new age super soldiers of the First Earth Battalion. But getting back to his first question here, are there any roles that animals play in religion or spirituality that are not related to blood sacrifice? Well, sure. I mean, some animals are worshipped. You had Apis, the sacred bull in ancient Egypt that was worshipped. You had, to some degree, cows are still worshipped in India. You've got cobra worship that has arisen in various places of the world where there are cobras. You've got Hanuman monkeys, maybe. They play a role in spirituality. They're considered to be sacred to Hindus because Hanuman, the monkey god, was of this same species of monkey. Let's see. Even the ancient Hebrews, they had the scapegoat, for example, which was a goat that they would just lay the sins of the Israelites, or the Judahites, or whatever heights they were. It would just, put the sins of the people onto this goat and then just let the goat go. In a way, I guess that was kind of a sacrifice in that they were laying all these sins on it. But, they didn't hurt it. It wasn't a blood sacrifice. They just let it go off into the wilderness where presumably it would be eaten by predators or something. Oh, let's see. What other, there's a lot of that kind of thing. Sacred animals, like in totemism, each tribe would have or each person within the tribe would have their totem animal that would be like a sacred animal. Let's see. What other animal religion is there not related to blood sacrifice? Well, I guess I gave a few examples anyway. So I guess because I'm not coming up with any more examples, I'm just going to move on to the next question. And this is from Austin. And Austin says, my girlfriend believes Osho was enlightened. However, I struggle to understand how someone can be considered enlightened while owning multiple luxury cars, not practicing celibacy, and failing to control a commune that engaged in terrorism. What are your thoughts? Well, my first thought is I need to try and blow my nose again. My nostrils are just got this weird thing going on. Okay. I think maybe that worked a little bit. Finally. So, when I was in Bali, when I was still a monk, this was several years ago, I happened to be introduced to some people who had been disciples of Osho. One of them was a German artist, if I remember correctly. They were like boomers who were living in like a really artistical kind of area of Bali. There was Ubud, and they were called the Buddhists. And so I met with some of the group, and I asked them I mentioned Paul Lowe because I was impressed with the wisdom of Paul Lowe. And I found out that Paul Lowe was like Osho's right-hand man in India. When Osho went to America, Paul Lowe pretty much just went his own way because there was like political infighting with him and Sheila and some other people in the group. But anyway, when I mentioned I was talking about Osho or Paul Lowe, and this German artist who had been a disciple of Osho, he mentioned that he had been a disciple of Osho, and I said, well, I was kind of thinking about this a lot at the time, and I think, do you think Osho was enlightened? And this German man, he just kind of like rolled his eyes and went, pfft, and it's like, of course he was. It was just plainly obvious. He was like nobody else I'd ever seen in my life. And so then I asked this other man named, well, I shouldn't say what his name was. He has passed away now. But I asked him if he thought that Osho was enlightened. And he was kind of inclined to think that he was, but he wouldn't say for sure. He was was kind of on the fence on that. And so, I mean, if somebody like Osho or Paul Lowe or Krishnamurti or even like Eckhart Tolle, I mean, if they really are enlightened, if enlightenment means anything for them, and the dog is snarfing. Will you stop it? Got this really snarfy dog. So, I mean, if somebody... Oh, yeah, that's really funny, isn't it? Stop it. Silly. So, if somebody like Osho or Krishnamurti, either of the Krishnamurtis, J or UG, if they can be fully enlightened, then Buddhist ideas, like Theravada Buddhist ideas especially, about what is required for enlightenment, probably are not exactly accurate. And so, does an enlightened sage also have to be just a perfect saint? According to Theravada Buddhism, the answer is yes. According to someone like Krishnamurti, the answer would be no. And I've been sort of, I've tended to kind of lean more in the direction of Krishnamurti. Mainly because, like, if you read the Atthakavagga, which is some of the most ancient Buddhist texts in existence, it does say, you shouldn't follow rules. What other people might blame you for, you don't care about that because it's just not an issue for you. You really don't consider that stuff to be important anyway. So, there are implications in the Atthakavagga that, you're not necessarily going to be a perfected saint to an outside observer anyway. And it does kind of make sense. Somebody like Krishnamurti, he did come up with some really profound information. Paul Lowe also. Paul Lowe was certainly not celibate. He may have been other things, but celibate wasn't one of them. And he's got some profound wisdom. So, see, Austin here is saying, I struggle to understand how someone can be considered enlightened when owning multiple luxury cars, not practicing celibacy, failing to control a commune that engaged in terrorism. Yeah, with regard to Osho, I have to admit, I've read a few of his books, and what he said did not seem particularly inspired. He was just sort of recycling, previously well-known spiritual information. And he was clearly a rascal. He apparently was strung out on drugs for a lot of the time that he was in Antelope, Oregon, which was when Sheila was like poisoning salad bars and trying to murder people and stuff. Yeah, with regard to Osho, I'm fairly skeptical that he was an enlightened being. I used to give this example, and I'm going to give it again now, that a monkey is at a higher level of consciousness than a sheep, but a monkey is way naughtier than a sheep. So just because you're at a higher level of consciousness doesn't mean you're going to be better behaved. Like in Theravada Buddhism, Mara, who is like the Buddhist devil, he's in a very advanced heaven realm. So, he's got some spiritual advancement to him of some sort, some kind of consciousness advancement over an ordinary human, but he's not fully enlightened. And so I think there can be a lot of confusion with regard to someone who's just had some kind of awakening experience and is at a higher level of consciousness but still not enlightened, that they may appear to be enlightened. They may actually consider themselves to be enlightened. A lot of their followers are going to consider them to be enlightened, but they're sort of like a monkey compared to a sheep. They're more advanced mentally, but they're just naughty. They're rascally. But then again, Neem Karoli Baba up there, who is like one of my favorite saints. He wasn't very saintly in a lot of his behavior. From a Theravada Buddhist point of view, there's no way he could possibly be enlightened. But, he had just astonishing psychic powers. And when he would look at you, he would know you better than you know you, just at first glance. He would just look right through you, at least according to numerous testimonies about man. So it's really kind of a paradox to me that, on one hand, I mean, I don't think that a fully enlightened being necessarily has to follow rules. I do think that like I was saying earlier, you're stuck being who you are. So even if you become enlightened, you're still going to appear to be who you were before, and you're going to have certain mannerisms and behaviors that may not seem to be enlightened, but it doesn't matter because you're not identified with that anymore. That's just nature taking its course. That's not you. It doesn't matter. But Theravada Buddhism says you have to perfect your morality before you can perfect your concentration. And you have to perfect your concentration before you can perfect your mind and become enlightened. So you have to have perfect morals to be enlightened. And I am skeptical of that, I have to admit. Partly, it may be just kind of a preference for the idea of a rascally sage, like Neem Karoli Baba was. So, with regard to Osho being enlightened, I'm rather skeptical of that, but I do think it is possible for someone who appears to be a rascal still to be, if not fully enlightened, at least way more advanced than the average human. So I'm just going to move on to the next question, which is the very last question. Finally, at long last, we've got to the last question. This is from Rui. And Rui says, did you ever engage in prolonged contemplation of the qualities of the Dhamma, timelessness, etc., or were these mostly in the background? Well, I mean, I did the chant sometimes of, you do the chant of the qualities of the Buddha, the qualities of the Dhamma, the qualities of the Sangha. But that's just chanting. I mean, you're generally not contemplating the meaning of the words. It's just flowing out of your mouth pretty much as a mantra. And sometimes, you'd be considering Dhamma, and then you'd think about, like the timeless, the akaliko aspect, where it's just Dhamma is timeless. It's not a culturally conditioned kind of thing, other than interpretations of it can be culturally conditioned, but Dhamma itself is just timeless, or ehipassiko aspect of it, which is come and see, that you have to examine it for yourself. You have to find out for yourself, whether it's true or not, because somebody else telling you really isn't good enough. That kind of thing. So I do consider it from time to time, but I never engage in prolonged contemplation of the qualities of the Dhamma. And according to the Visuddhimagga, for what that's worth, it's such an elementary level of meditation. It's one of the 40 topics of meditation that's listed in the Visuddhimagga, the contemplation of the qualities of the Dhamma. But there's so much thinking involved that you don't even get to jhana with it. That it's an elementary level, pretty much of a beginner's level meditation that's probably of greater value for a Burmese villager, who's just unwinding at the end of the day. They're just going through their rosary and doing the qualities of the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha with their rosary, that kind of thing. Then that's fine. But I didn't really know anybody that was really seriously contemplating the qualities of the Dhamma as a regular meditation method, other than just as a kind of mantra with a rosary or a mala, they're called. So, I did not engage in prolonged contemplation of the qualities of the Dhamma, and I'm not sure that I ever met anybody who did. I assume that, somebody that I've come across has done it, but it's just not a meditation technique that gets you very deep in meditation. And so it's generally not taught and encouraged very much, except, as I've said more than once already, for just a normie Burmese Buddhist villager with a mala, and they'll just go through the mantra, the Pali formulas as a kind of meditation. But just going through a Pali formula, just reciting that over and over again, is not the same as contemplation of the qualities of the Dhamma. So that's it. I think I answered that. And even if I didn't, I've pretty much run out of juice. Like almost literally, look at that much juice left. So, and you guys already know, if you want to ask any questions about, you want to know anything about something you think I might be able to answer, like Buddhism, obviously, especially Theravada Buddhism, meditation, monasticism, especially Buddhist monasticism, just Eastern spirituality in general, philosophy in general, stuff like that. Even a certain amount of paranormal stuff, I might be able to answer questions on that. Questions about me personally, I'm generally pretty good at understanding my own self pretty well. And if you do have questions, just include them in the comments below the video. And if you liked the video and you got this far with it, then feel free to give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. And be happy.